Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. I have a lot of ground to cover today, some of which is important and, to me, heartfelt, some of which is hopefully entertaining, so I'm mixing today levity with gravitas. So those of you who don't want the gravitas, skip over it, please. And those of you who don't want the levity, skip over it, please. And those of you who want both, thank you so much. Enjoy. So I'm going to start with a correction. Thank you for this. Wise old owl was simply one of many people who pointed out to me, and I read, it was Anne Baxter who starred in All About Eve. Anne Blythe played Joan Crawford's spoilt daughter in the equally classic film Mildred Pierce. Thank you for that. Well, I got the name wrong, which to me is rather interesting because I liked them both very much when I was a child. And I think I just confused them, but thanks for that. And interesting how memory works. I really didn't honestly think that I was wrong. Interesting that, no? Now, you might have noticed I have pretty much avoided the subject of Harry's visa application papers having been released. I've said it all along. He's not going to be deported. And it's been obvious to me all along that there is no way that the American administration, I think I've actually said it repeatedly, would be deporting Harry or indeed doing anything that would embarrass the king. Harry remains the king's son. It's meaningless, really, publishing redacted papers. But what's really interesting is what the redaction relates to. And there's all sorts of speculation that Harry might have been embroidering or do you like it when Mummy does a clap? Mickey, do you like Mummy doing a clap? I leave it at that. Whatever. There's no need to embarrass somebody with their past peccadillos or their private medical records. And if the American law states that certain papers are private, they should remain private, irrespective of who is concerned. I just make that point for what it's worth. I think it was a worthy thing of Niall Gardiner and the Heritage Foundation, but I always knew it was going to end up being nothing but a damp squib. And I suspect there's no way it's going to ever explode. So that's why I've really avoided the subject and will continue to avoid it. Shall we give me a clap? Just as long as it's not the clap. We're happy. Co-Cop says, Dear Lady C, it's been reported in Tom Sykes' latest column for the Daily Beast that Netflix is keeping Harry and Meghan close in the hopes of getting the big post-divorce interview. I understand Netflix was upset it lost out on the Oprah interview post-Megxit and that it hopes to get the next big scoop by giving the Markles an extension on their current contract. What say you? Well, Tom Sykes is extremely well connected. He is a proper aristocrat. I've known his family for much of my life. His father used to spend every weekend down here after his stepmother died, until his father died. I know how well connected he is. And I would listen to anything Tom has to say. Let me put it that way. I'm trying to find a diplomatic way of putting this. My understanding is, and I've more or less said it repeatedly, that Netflix doesn't want to sever ties entirely if they can get Meghan especially, but Harry and Meghan cheaply. Meghan and Harry don't have many other options. I think they're actually more interested in Meghan than in Harry, because I think they have already understood. Because remember, they're not stupid, and they are Hollywood, and they know that Vanity Fair would never have published the fact that Meghan was shopping around with publishers, or having people shop around on her behalf, might be a more accurate way of putting it, for a post-divorce book deal, unless it were true. So they will also have figured out that in the event of a split between Meghan and Harry, that the likelihood of Harry actually spilling the beans is remote, while the certainty of Meghan spilling the beans, and maybe cooking up a whole load of new beans as well, just for everybody's delectation, is not remote. In fact, the certainty is as certain as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. So let us put it like that. I gather, and I've said this before, so I hate to have to repeat myself, but to answer the question, and I think this is going to be an issue that will keep on bubbling over for the foreseeable future. Netflix knows it can get Meghan cheaply. It knows Meghan has a run out of options. If Meghan doesn't stay with Netflix, Meghan's reputation is going to suffer. So they are in a strong negotiating position. She's in a weak negotiating position because she has failure stamped all over her. I think that about summarizes it, don't you? I can't think there's another dimension to this that I should be covering. If there is, if it occurs to me, I'll come back. Kath Colapinto says, The King and Queen are visiting Rome later this year. The royal family would not be making plans for overseas visits if the King's health was in jeopardy. Good point. They're also due to go to Canada next year. Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's life, there's hope. And as long as the King and Queen are drawing a breath and able to travel, they are obviously going to make plans to fulfill their duties, which he loves. She enjoys being dutiful late in the game. Sorry, because she didn't, when she was younger, have any career at all. But she's grown into the role and she has seen the spiritual benefits of it. He is something of a workaholic who, you see, to somebody like the present king and the late queen, being a monarch isn't just a job, it's a calling. It's like being a nun or a priest. It is vocational. Oh, I just realized I missed out a bit on the previous question. Netflix was really very cross with Harry and Meghan for giving Oprah the interview. My understanding is that they felt it was a real betrayal, and it was. Now, where does the word betrayal sound so familiar? Judas Iscariot, Harry and Meghan. Can we think of anybody else? I'm not so sure. So we will plunge in now, back with what Catherine in Wales says, spelled with a K, not a C. If I and many others knew about Fauci and funding the Wuhan research simply by asking questions and doing some digging, why is this such a revelation to so many people? We tried to tell people what was going on and were vilified and abused. Very good point. Everybody knew. The mainstream media, the politicians, on both sides of the political divide. Everybody knew that Anthony Fauci had moved the funding because Obama had forbidden it in the United States of America and into Wuhan in China. There was no secret about it. Anybody who said anything to the contrary in terms of that it was not a genuine accident, and indeed that it hadn't come from the market, was initially shut down. So if you said it on YouTube, I think you would get away with it depending on how measured you were. Because I covered the fact of the Great Barrington Declaration. I was very careful how I put it, because I didn't wish to be shut down. But people who were less measured were shut down, and YouTube was one of the best of all of the platforms, but many of the others just point blank shut you down if you even hinted at anything. My information, and actually now my belief, is that but for COVID, there was the general acceptance within Washington that Trump would be re-elected. He was a shoo-in. And they understood that those who were not in favor of a re-election for Trump, and this included Dr. Fauci, that they could use COVID to derail Trump's possibility of re-election, and did so successfully. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's now no doubt in any reasonable person's mind that the virus escaped from Wuhan or was released. I would prefer to think it escaped and they then opportunistically acted upon it. That may be bad practice and somebody in the lab caught it, whatever. I prefer to believe that. I think other people don't, but I would prefer to believe that. And this presented Trump's opponents with the opportunity to mock him, because ivermectin, it turns out, is actually a very effective, more and far safer than any of the COVID vaccines that they came up with, none of which, incidentally, were vaccines. They were boosters of your system. And it was also a way of the World Health Organization hopped in, and so did the European Union. And if anybody said anything that went against the rhetoric, because there's a lot of stuff coming out in England now in terms of Valence and our people in England that were busy suppressing any medical evidence that disagreed with their narrative. COVID was also used very conveniently by Dominic Cummings to bring down Boris Johnson. So COVID turned out to be a wonderful tool for bringing down politicians or preventing politicians from being re-elected. The fact that it has to a large extent destroyed the world's economy and certainly has affected a generation of children who should have been at school and weren't for 2 years. And those will be lifelong effects, as well as the fact that hundreds of millions, if not billions of people were used as guinea pigs, me included, with the COVID vaccine, which it is emerging, has had unforeseen side effects, which it was obvious they would have. Yes, I am familiar with the other side of the argument that something needed to be done. How well it was managed is something that is going to be debated for at least a century or two, should the world remain in the condition that let me rephrase that. Should civilization continue on its present plateau? R.J. Andrade says, "Thank you for calling out Dr. Fauci. I believe the more voices the public hear concerning the fear-mongering and blatant lies that he and the rest of the political class pushed for money and power, the more people will come to understand how they were used and duped." I couldn't agree more. It was obvious to me from pretty early on that people were being frightened into compliance in a way that was deeply ominous. I did what I could within the parameters that it was possible to shed some light and some reason on the subject, because the Great Barrington Declaration was so important. And of course, all of the scientists who were involved with it, as well as other scientists such as Alina Chan, they were muzzled or their careers were derailed, frighteningly. Diane Galway says, the 4 doses of vaccine that were required here in Canada left me with long vaccine symptoms, and I hope it will get better over time. You're not alone. You're not alone. I have had respiratory issues for months over the winter, and every day I am exhausted. Exhaustion is one of the symptoms of the COVID vaccine that has emerged, especially when people are physically active. What the outcome will be is anybody's guess. So let me continue. Up until this fall, my doctor and I had to have another shot. And this time I said no, and I will not discuss it further. Now I am left alone because healthcare has come to the conclusion that this mRNA vaccine can leave lasting damage in many ways. I'm sorry I ever took it. You're not alone. I had 3 doses, 2 AstraZeneca and 1 Pfizer. I had to have them because I was going to the United States of America for my niece's wedding in Boston. And also, I could not actually believe that the powers that be would be so reckless and so unconscionable as to push untested vaccines using the world's population as guinea pigs irresponsibly. I'm not blaming the doctors, they did their best. I'm blaming the politicians who did their worst. Quantum Entanglement says, oh, and may I say, I now know too many people who have had decided, definite side effects from the vaccines to know that something seriously ominous has happened. And that is why I was one of the people who pushed so hard for the World Health Organization to not be allowed to yet again push an agenda whereby everybody all over the world would have their civil liberties abused, so that the politicians and the unelected officials could dictate to us that we had to have certain procedures done, failing which we were going to be excluded from civil society. Let's leave it at that. Quantum Entanglement says, Dear Lady C, Trump has invalidated the pardons that the Biden administration signed with auto pen, making them void and not legal. Do you believe that Fauci should be charged with crimes against humanity? God bless. May I say, the auto pen issue is not as straightforward as some people seem to think it is. Many presidents have used auto pens for documents to be signed that were regarded as valid. Where the Trump administration has a window of opportunity was Biden competent, and was Biden aware of what was going on? Because remember, there was an investigation done while Biden was president, saying he was not competent to stand trial. Well, if he wasn't competent to stand trial, he really was not competent to be the leader of the Western world, the free world. I think that's what it used to be called. Not so sure how free it's become recently. However, do I think he should be charged with crimes against humanity? There is little doubt that Fauci and the scientists at Wuhan were playing with the viruses. And you have to ask yourself, how responsible is it for any scientist to be boosting viruses as weapons of destruction? I seem to recall that things like mustard gas were declared unlawful at the end of the First World War and should never be used. So why was this happening? Also, there is the fact that it was moved from the United States of America to Wuhan in Obama's period. That tells me that either Obama was dead against it, or he understood that his legacy as a leader would be destroyed if it became apparent that he was involved in creating viruses that could destroy humanity, or at least eradicate a significant proportion of the populations of various countries. Is that a crime against humanity? Yes, it is, in my view. Should those who are responsible be held accountable? Yes, they should. Who is going to hold them responsible, and who is going to hold them accountable? Clearly not the powers that be, because it's the powers that be that are actually creating these problems. Let's leave it at that for the moment. Lady Villa says, it's my understanding that Dr. Fauci had professional and financial links with the lab in Wuhan. I'd like to be wrong, but... Oh, he definitely did. There's no doubt about this. And it's been known all along. And it's ironic that the mainstream media failed to do their job by calling him to account, but went along with the fallacy and the fictions and the narrative that he and his political cohorts were pushing, clearly to destroy Donald Trump's chances of re-election. It's the only reason that makes sense. There's also the fact that Ukraine, ever since Victoria Nuland's assistance in the coup that toppled Yanukovych, has been a hot spot for biolabs like Wuhan. And in fact, one of them was captured by the Russians, who destroyed it safely. So we are here busy saying in the West how monstrous Putin is. But he destroyed one of the labs that were trying to create weapons that would kill us. Now, I'm not saying Putin is an angel, because he's clearly not. But I am saying that Fauci is a devil. And I think he should be held to account. That is what I'm saying. But who's going to hold him to account? I don't think he's going to be held to account. Kitty says, "Dear Lady C, could you please explain what's happening with UK's Reform Party? From the outside point of view, it looks as if various forces within the UK and possibly outside as well are trying to destroy the party. I know Dan Wooten has been covering this for a while now, but I'd rather like to hear what you think about it. Thank you." Thank you for that. I'm going to, because I don't want this to be too heavy a session, so I'm going to just say very quickly. There has been a big falling out between Nigel Farage and one of the MPs. A party needs to have a leader. In the democratic world, you need to have a leader. And there needs to be a degree of discipline. And there needs to be a degree of cohesiveness. And no party, well, let's stick to what Jesus Christ said. A house divided against itself cannot stand. No, I do not think that it is outside forces that have caused this ruction, and I think it is a genuine difference of opinion between two strong leaders. And, two cocks, one walk. That's really what it's all about. And I think it's unfortunate because the Reform Party is streets ahead of the Conservative Party, and it's pretty much ahead of the Labour Party at this point in terms of popularity with many people. And I think the Conservative Party is really worried, and ultimately they are going to, for Labour to not remain in power ad infinitum, the Conservatives and Reform are going to have to join forces and come to some sort of arrangement, the way the Liberal Democrats and Labour did, and then the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives did. So it's not as unthinkable as some people might think it is. But do I think it's outside forces? No. I think it's two cocks, one walk. Leslie Coke says, they will not divorce They have no one to turn to, and they are both too pig-headed to admit the failure of the love story of the century. I think there's a merit to this statement, and that's why I've read it out. But, you know, when you're dealing with an extremely dominating ball breaker, and you're dealing with a beta male who thinks he's an alpha male and has a pretty bad temper, something's gotta give. And this was the fare of the royal family initially, that it would give in not a good way. Will it happen? Who knows? Quite frankly, who cares? I certainly don't. I mean, I don't care if the both of them fight each other not only to a standstill, but beyond a standstill, as long as they don't take anyone else with them. Personally speaking, I think never did a couple deserve each other quite so much as that couple. A.V. Toth says, or Tote, I'm not sure which one it is. It would be Tote in European terms. The fact that Harry wanted his own Catherine and chose Markle to be his Stepford Catherine tells me he never understood Catherine or women. This is a really shrewd comment, and I'm reading it out because I think it's so shrewd, and I thank you, A.V. Tote or Toth. Catherines in this world aren't as easily gotten as people think. Quite right so. Absolutely. You know, virtuous women beyond the price of rubies? Calling her weighty Katie shows me that's a common misunderstanding. Absolutely. In my opinion, Catherine was not desperate to have a future king. She couldn't have been desperate for anyone because she could have had anyone. Well, that's not quite true, but I think she certainly has always had tremendous confidence, and well, she's actually said it. As far as she's concerned, William was the lucky one and she wasn't, because William had got her, she got him. So, and she's not full of herself, but she certainly knew her value, let's put it that way. And may I also say, it is folly to say that somebody isn't aware of worldly advantage if they have a brain in their head. Just as how it's folly to say that beautiful women aren't aware of it. They always are. And they know the value of it. So I just point out that, you can have good motives, you can have noble motives, you can have great character, but worldly considerations are also considerations. So let me continue. In my opinion, Catherine was not desperate to have a future king. She couldn't have been desperate for anyone because she could have had anyone. I'm going to interject again and say the fact that she was going to have a future king was definitely never a minus, but she wouldn't have wanted the future king if she hadn't wanted the man. Rather like me, Catherine is a desert island sort of girl. Would I want him or would I want it if I were stuck on a desert island? If the answer is yes, we go for it. If the answer is no, we don't. So I think that's a very important, which doesn't mean you're blind to the worldly advantages. Catherine possessed the wisdom and maturity, and that's absolutely right, she's an old soul, as is William, to understand that until William worked out his nerves, doubts, and jitters, until he'd decided, was sure that she was whom he wanted, any trying to force his hand might land him, but there would never be a real bond even if they were married. Very shrewd and very well spotted. William doesn't strike me as someone who likes games. William, my dear, rather like me, was brought up with a mother who played games and involved us in them. I tell you something, it's an eye-opener. Catherine doesn't strike me as a game player. No. The courting games of teenagers are not played by mature adults. Movies, TV, things like the romantic comedy have given young women the idea that marriage or even long-term relationships should be romanced 24/7. If you are bored, you should divorce. This is so brilliant, I cannot tell you. I love every bit of it. I've always said I'm not a romantic, just to interject and say that how I agree with this. I've always said I'd much rather some man I loved forgot my birthday or didn't make a big deal of it, but was there when I needed him. And I've never been the flowers sort of chick, ever. If you really have your values straight, I don't think you can be romantic. Love is too serious a proposition to be blinded by romance or have romance distort it. Marriage is long stretches of boring occasional adventure. Libido changes. The fire doesn't go out, the embers back. It goes from fiery lust to contentment. You're obviously a certain age. Love it. Being content is the goal, and these days few are able to get past the brainwashing. I have to say, I agree. I mean, the really important thing is to know that your other half is there for you and respects you and values you, and you value him or her, if depending on the situation. So my gut tells me that Catherine's mother explained all of this and did so repeatedly to her children once it became appropriate. Catherine strikes me as the kind of woman who understands that from time to time, pondering the best location for a shallow grave is normal. It's only a real problem if you actually start shopping for the perfect shovel. Love it. I had to read that out. I think it's so wise. I think it's so true. I think it's just wonderful. Diane Fraser says, hello, Lady C. And we're going to end on a personal note with two things. Hello, Lady C. Imagine my surprise when I opened the April edition of Royals Monthly, Australian magazine, and saw a 4-page article about you. It was written by Jane Price and entitled, she said, What? Big block capitals for the what. I just wanted to let you know in case you didn't already know. I didn't. Had no idea. As I felt it revealed very personal information about you, and it pondered how you get away with your many outrageous, in quotes, statements and claims, because they're true. Outrageous is only outrageous when you want to buy pie in the sky instead of Beef Bourguignon from the corner shop. I quote, one of her most outrageous claims in the book is that Meghan was actually never pregnant and Prince Archie Harrison and Princess Lilibet Diana were carried by surrogates. I know that you speak about Meghan's conduct casting doubt on this issue, but I have never heard or read you actually claim that. Many thanks for sharing your humor and intellect on your very enjoyable channel. Love and blessings from Australia. Thank you so much for that, Dan Fraser. No, I haven't read it. I don't intend to read it. I will make the point that it's a new idea. A new idea paid me tens of thousands of pounds in 1992. Might have been 1991, but I think it was early 1992, to be able to run stuff on my first Diana book. I think they then bought Royal Marriages as well for a very handsome sum. They obviously put their money where their mouth was in terms of my veracity. And also, nothing of any consequence that I have ever said has ever been discounted or disabused. Nothing. So, we need to understand that I am not where some of these journalists are concerned. I'm not just a writer. And this has been a big problem for them. And they try to make it into a problem for me. Because I'm not just a writer. I am myself. I am my connections. I am the family I was born into. I am the family I married into. I am the world I have lived in all my life, which is a world that is, to be blunt, elitist, that they have never had access to and never will. And it sticks in their craw, but it also means that they are able to use me to tell the public things that they want to tell the public, but don't have the courage to tell the public. So they will say, I said something when I actually didn't. Or my statement was measured. Theirs is elaborate and theirs is exaggerated. It's for them to get their point across, but they don't have the courage to do it. So they hide behind my skirts. Never heard of, what's her name? Jane Price. Couldn't care less. I'm not just a writer, and they know it. They've always known it. I was making the front pages of newspapers long before I was ever a writer, before I published a word. And long before that, I was in society columns on both sides of the Atlantic. That's also what they can't forgive me for. But do I care? I have no idea what she says. And quite frankly, thanks for telling me. It's very sweet of you. But as long as it's nothing defamatory, let her say whatever the heck she wants. She's of no consequence as far as I'm concerned. Pity, though, that these people don't have the courage to actually stand up and be counted the way I have always done. And now, but then again, of course, you see, I can't be dismissed. They can. I don't sell my soul or my honor. Many of them do. And I'm not knocking them. I'm fortunate to be in the position where I don't have to betray or cut my cloth according to the present trend. I have the luxury of being able to advocate for what I know to be good, true, and fair. And who doesn't like it can lump it. That is a great luxury to have, and I'm aware of it. I'm also aware that it has responsibilities attendant upon its existence. And since I've now been at this for several decades and nobody's been able to trip me up, I think there's a message there somewhere. But we'll end with what E.L. Ophelia says. I also watched you on Sally Jesse Raphael from the Royal Grift. And not only were you just as stunning then as you are now. Thank you very much. And I'm going to make a point about this. Long before I was ever known for being a writer, I was known for my looks. And that has been a double-edged sword. Because if you were known for your looks, you weren't really supposed to have brains. I mean, why would any good-looking woman have brains? Also, I was born into a family of what you could call professional beauties. So to an extent, it was a family tradition to be attractive, well-presented, glamorous, and to be known as a beauty, which, I mean, there are many women who are, or girls as well, who are much better looking than I ever was. And I've always said it. You know, when people said, oh, she's one of the most beautiful women. Excuse me, I'm not. Walk down any street and you'll see girls that are equally good looking or better looking. But I had position. And that means the diamond had a setting, while other diamonds didn't have settings. They were in the earth, so to speak, and so they didn't shine as brightly. One needs to be very realistic about these things. And also, because of my upbringing, I was delighted that I was known for my looks, because to an extent it contradicted the rumors that circulated about me. And so there was a practical reason for using my looks. But I have to tell you, I'd have used them in any event. And I didn't misuse them, say, the way my mother did, because I made sure I was never professional beauty. But the downside of being known for your looks, and also of being from a grand background, was that you couldn't be intelligent. And therefore, anything you said, I mean, I remember in the very first press conference that I did for my 1992 Diana in Private, one of the journalists asked me in front of everybody, and of course they all thought it was so funny and he was so droll. Oh, so tell me, Lady Colin, does the butler bring you the latest chapter with your breakfast? I mean, idiots. Anyway, so having covered that, let's move on to what it said. But it's very clear that you are authentic and have stayed true to yourself. Absolutely. You are just as sassy and you've always held your own. It proves that the you that we see today is the you that you have always been. And you stand by your word and your sources. You were treated horribly on that TV show, and they were determined to dig at you. It was great to see you stand your ground and not give in to their abrasive and common pressure. Your character shines through. Thank you very much. As far as I'm concerned, character is destiny. And I said all those decades ago I said, what I'm writing will stand the test of time. I said, 50 years from now, when someone reads what I've written, they say, wow, she really knew what she was talking about. She was absolutely spot on. And I also made the point that the Andrew Mortons of this world and the James Whittakers, etc., and the Nicholas Davises, and I could go on, but we won't. Anything they said would not stand the test of time because it didn't have the substance, it wasn't accurate, it was pie in the sky rubbish that sold well at the time and fitted in with the narrative at the time. But I will make the point that it's thanks to the increased televisual aspects of our age and the accessibility that people have to be in direct contact, so to speak, with an author, that they then get the author's measure via the author's character. That was not so before the advent of the televisual age, and especially now with social media, because everybody's a mini television star. Everybody is, because when I say television, I mean live, that's then recorded performance, so to speak, where you are actually relating to the public and you are showing yourself. And also, you're showing your ignorance and your knowledge. I've always been careful because I have always functioned on the premise it is better to be thought a fool than speak and remove all doubt, number one. And number two, if I don't know what I'm talking about, I keep my mouth shut. And number three, if I make a mistake, I put my hands up and say, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Fortunately, I am proud enough to not want to have to eat too much humble pie. So I try to get it right. And certainly, I would never fall in the rut of being anybody's Goebbels, which is what Andrew Morton was with Diana, what Amid Scabies has been with Meghan. And when Andrew wrote his book on Meghan Markle, the premarital biography, I mean, he's a professional writer and he's a competent journalist, but all that smarmy exaggeration and, quite frankly, bull that he comes up with, and the exaggerations of, oh, she was a great Hollywood star. I've always been very careful to actually call a spade, and sometimes I even call it a something shovel. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what ground you would like us to be covering. Thank you. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care. Bye-bye.